Hi, everyone. I want to give a preview of this Sunday's Sunday school class. We're continuing our look at the doctrine of sin. Note we started out by looking at our confession of faith and sort of laying the groundwork for understanding sin. And last week and then this week, we're going to just look at some various aspects of sin or sin from different angles. And I'm drawing from the book Not the Way It's Supposed to Be by Cornelius Plantinga. And it was a book I read in seminary, and I recommend it. It's just really well written. So last time we talked about sin as sort of a violation of shalom, the shalom of God. We talked about sin as corruption. We talked about it as perversion, pollution, disintegration. We saw how sin multiplies and grows in sometimes an almost uncontrollable fashion. We never merely commit one sin, and usually they come in clusters and they morph and grow as we try to do anything but confess and repent and trust God. We also saw sin acting like a parasite. Sin really only exists in its relation to the good things that God has given us. And so it is most often understood as a perversion of the things that are good and are part of God's good creation. Today, I want to finish off this list. And so the first thing we're going to look at is that sin is a masquerade. In other words, sin is a mask. It hides the reality of what things really are. It induces us to live as hypocrites, presenting ourselves one way to a world and another way to ourselves. It presents a falsehood, a false characterization. A great line, I didn't come up with it, and I don't know where it was. I forgot to Google it to see if somebody famous had said it, but there's this line, hypocrisy is an homage that vice pays to virtue. And so if virtue is something that's laudable, then vice is going to imitate it because as a way of paying homage to it, it's kind of a nice turn of phrase. Satan himself, we're told by Paul, can masquerade as an angel of light. And so at the heart of sin, there is falsehood and lying and a presentation of what is not as though it were. And we see this in society a lot. For every evasion of traditional sin, there's a listing of new sins. So if you say, for example, if folks want to dismiss and do away with the traditional sexual ethic within the Christian faith, the new sin might be prudishness or something like that. There's always a sense in which people are never empty of coming up with new sins that might fit their agendas or their ideas of what the good life is. But we know that where we get our understanding of sin is not from our own private or personal agendas, but from the Word of God. There's also the fact that sin is self-deception, and not only can we hide ourselves from others, but we can hide ourselves from ourselves. And this is what makes sin sometimes so utterly maddening, because we can be completely unaware of what our sin is doing to us. And this is why we need other people. We need that voice of the other to point us and point out our own faults and point us to what is true. And that's just how horrible sin can be. And in the church, this is especially true. And so we can say nothing can hide the face of God like religion, that we can put up a false front, a hypocrisy, just like the Pharisees did throughout the Gospels. The other thing we can note is that sin is foolish and sin is dumb. And to use an old word, sin is folly. The biblical writers think of sin as the main species of folly. Why do we do foolish things? Why do we blunder through life? Well, so often at the heart of it is sin. That's not to say that every folly is sin, but at the heart of folly, at the heart of sin, there is always this foolishness and folly. I guess I could see the shortest and clearest way to state the relation between sin and folly is to say that not all folly is sin, but all sin is folly. Sin is both wrong and dumb. It's a form of self-abuse. We hurt ourselves with our sin, and sin is an enemy not only to God, but it's an enemy to us. It does not make for our best self, even though we are often motivated by a longing for what is we think is good and what is best, but that doesn't come about through sin. God-fearing people have a dreadful love for God, an awe-filled love that knows God is not mocked, and that we reap whatever we sow, and that God is not to be fooled with, scorned, or ignored, but God is to be trusted, loved, and obeyed. We can also look at the tragedy of addiction in relation to sin, and obviously that's a huge topic in and of itself. And I'll be honest, it's not a topic that I have any expertise in. But we know the reality of addiction in our world today. And when we think of addiction, when we look at addiction, what we do see are really some significant dynamics of sin. Addiction is a complex, progressive, injurious, and disabling attachment to a substance or behavior, often done for the sake of altering a mood or relieving anxiety or wanting to escape a situation, wanting to feel better or not feel anything at all. What drives addiction is a longing of the whole person. We know that substance abuse, for example, has a direct bearing on the body's craving for that substance, and it goes to our very soul too. It's a longing of the heart as well. But we don't want to look at addiction in an overly simplistic way either. It's not just a matter of changing one's heart and then everything will fall into place. Addiction is something we see that has a history of actions that have brought a person to a specific place. What we see with addiction, we see a pattern of destructive behavior. What we can't see is the extent to which a person has control over the actions that they are doing. This is one of the tragedies of addiction, is that it starts out, it has a prehistory of choices and acts in which the person has a significant amount of agency to participate in taking this substance or choosing not to. But we also know that addiction and the pattern of addiction has a very destructive feature to it, in that as people become more and more dependent upon the substance, their internal agency, their will to make the choice that needs to be made becomes sort of eroded or swallowed up or almost vanished, to the point where there really is no sort of sense of human agency at work in the destructive behavior, and that's why addiction therapies are often built upon reestablishing the person's identity, and with that the person's agency, their ability to make and do things, their ability to exercise their will. And this is one of the reasons why we can think of addiction as a tragedy. Tragedy implies seeing the fall of a glorious figure, a person made in the image of God, and their fall comes about through a weak and foolish and sinful behavior, and so there's a direct connection with sin and addiction, in that it does involve the making of choices, but it then also results in the destruction, near destruction of the human will. Finally, I just want to touch on this, that sin does play a significant role in affecting our own body's God-given way of protecting ourselves. God has made our bodies with mechanisms for self-protection, fight, flight, or freeze. These are responses that are triggered by the brain. They're often chemically triggered by an injection of, say, cortisol or adrenaline, that might happen in very acute and intense situations. So, like this picture of a hiker suddenly coming upon a bear on his hike, you would have your body would suddenly respond and your brain would tell your body what to do, and you might run, which might not be a good idea. You might fight the bear, which also might not be a good idea, or you might freeze, which you never know. That might not be a good idea either. I guess the lesson there is if you meet a bear on the trail, you're in big trouble. But nevertheless, those things are natural and good. I mean, there's no sin in running from a bear. But the problem is that it doesn't. Those natural reactions that are a part of our own physiology, they also sort of manifest themselves in all sorts of contexts where we are anxious, and so sin has a way of really weaponizing those reactions. You see, reactions. I mean, you can think of it like this: if original sin is sort of that threshold through which all of our actions, our thoughts, our words, our deeds, they must travel through. There's no kind of pure action because of original sin. Now, some actions are good, some actions are benign, but nevertheless, there is always the reality that they arise out of a sinful, fallen nature. And so, even self-protective mechanisms like fight and flight, those things will be used in the context of relationships with people, and they can be very damaging. And so sin is at work there. So sin can cause us to hide from someone or to avoid someone, not wanting to bring up a difficult or delicate subject. Sin might cause us to fight a person, to turn on them, to be angry at them, to seek to destroy them or damage their reputation or damage their property or person in any number of different ways. And we can think of freeze as a type of avoidance also. Freeze is just wanting to stand so still with the hope that you're not seen. And so it's a way of avoidance. It's a type of flight, but not absenting yourself from the presence. Sin uses these responses in situations where courage, calmness, love, and caring, those are the things that God wills for us in our relationships, and yet sin can easily turn and use the anxiety that can sometimes come within relationships. I mean, relationships can be anxiety inducing, but that's why you need courage and calmness to stay within a relationship. You need love. Love bears all things. Love believes all things. There is a great amount of courage that is a part of all relationships, and these responses can easily be used to undermine that. And so anyway, well, let's talk about these things on Sunday, and I look forward to seeing you as we gather together for our last Sunday school class of the year before the summer. And my mouse stopped working.